But when completeness comes, what is he referring to? He's referring to what we have today, the complete Word of God. There was a reason these gifts were in place at the time. The complete Word of God was not done yet. And it was also prophecy, Word of God. But it was also to prove what they were saying was true. So today, there's not a person alive that can walk over to another person and put their hands on them and heal them. Period. There's not somebody that can prophesy. There's not someone that can talk in tongues. Period. Now, I really wanted to, I looked up, if y'all know who Robert Tilton is. He was a televangelist back in the day, a real sleazy guy. But he would always talk in tongues. It was complete gibberish. And he, was, blah, blah, blah. Hey, if you knew, I was talking to you. You need to send me such and such amount of money. First of all, tongues were not just gibberish. Tongues, as we know, were languages. Other words, in first part of Acts there, where the fire came down and they talked in tongues, they were talking in other people's languages. I can't speak anything other than English, okay? If I would have been there all of a sudden and I had the gift to speak tongue, I'd have been able to speak another language, be it French, be it Germanic, be it whatever it was. That's what we are talking about, period. And what we need to remember here from chapter 13 specifically is love should be an all-encompassing regulator of moral conduct. That's something we should take from chapter 13. Love should color everything we do. And as we jump back into verse 11, it says, when I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put away childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I will know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. All right, I'm going to just keep moving if we're going to keep... I had some really neat notes there. The mirrors of the time were not like we have. The mirrors of the time were polished brass and so forth. It's pretty neat. There's some pretty great information there. But picking up in 14, of course, what he's talking about there briefly is, they didn't have the full Word of God. We won't understand everything while we're here on this earth, right? A day will come when we will. There we go. Chapter 14, verse 1, it says, follow the way of love and eagerly desire gifts of the Spirit, especially prophecy. For anyone who speaks in tongues does not speak to people, but to God. Indeed, no one understands them. They utter mysteries by the Spirit. But the one who prophesies speaks to people for their strengthening, encouraging, and comfort. Now we know, of course, from Acts 2 what tongues actually were. Why were they doing it? See, some of the people in Corinth were trying to do it to say, look at me, look at what I'm able to do. What should it have been? It should have been to glorify God. All of the spiritual gifts were to glorify God, not to make the person that had that gift stand out. Picks up in verse 4, anyone who speaks in tongue edifies themselves, but the one who prophesies edifies the church. And this is what he's going about here. He's saying, you got the people speaking in tongues so they can say, hey, look at me. But he's kind of saying, but the people that prophesies edify the church. And no matter what your gift is, it should be to edify the church, God. I would like every one of you to speak in tongues, but I'd rather have you prophesy. The one who prophesies is greater than the one who speaks in tongues, unless someone interprets, so that the church may be edified. Now, brothers and sisters, if I come to you and speak in tongues, what good would I be to you unless I bring you some revelation or knowledge or prophecy or word of instruction? Even in the case of lifeless things that make sounds, such as a pipe or a harp, how will anyone know what the tune is being played unless there is a distinction in the notes? Again, if the trumpet does not sound a clear call, who will be ready for battle? So it is with you. Unless you speak intelligible words with your tongue, how will anyone know what you are saying? You will be just speaking into the air. Undoubtedly, there are all sorts of languages in the world, yet none of them is without meaning. If then I do not grasp the meaning of what someone is saying, I am a foreigner to the speaker, and the speaker is a foreigner to me. So it is with you. Since you are eager for gifts of the Spirit, try to excel in those that build up the church. In other words, not you. I mean, if someone's over there, quote unquote, speaking in tongues, and no one knows what they're saying, the only thing that's happening is people looking at them. Boy, we really need to keep going. We're losing time fast. I'm going to skip down. Let me see how far I'm going to. All right, all of that, what does it come down to? Like I've been saying, love, right? If we're doing this, who are you doing it for? Are you doing it just like all this relief effort that's going on? It's great. It needs to be done. Love it. There is a certain amount of publicity that needs to be so people that want to help can join in. But there are a lot of people as well during all types of events like this, are doing stuff so they can get likes on YouTube or whatever. And you think, what does that got to do with anything? You can make a living. You can make a lot of money with a lot of likes. Just going to say, you get 1 million likes, that's $7,500, I think it is, something like that. And, you know, it just keeps going. It just keeps going. People do stuff to get attention for themselves. Paul is saying that is not why you should be speaking in tongues. The only reason you should be using gifts is to edify God and the church. So as we start reading again, good order in church. So Paul's really covered this whole tongue things there quite a bit, and love, and as we've just been talking about. But good order in worship down in verse 26 of chapter 14, it says, What then shall we say, brothers and sisters? When you come together, each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Everything must be done so that the church may be built up. Everybody was coming together to say, look at me. I can do this. Oh, I need to say this. I'm Mr. Big Shot or Miss Big Shot or whatever. And that is not the reason people should be at church. That is not the reason people should be doing things in church. But we all know it happens. There are people that go to church to help themselves. And what I mean by that is they've got this business. So they go to this big old church over there so they know people. So people will get to know them, and they'll get more business, and then they'll get more business from other people, and so forth. It happens, sadly. He goes on to speak here that it said there's no interpreter, there shouldn't be speaking. And it says in 26, I want you to see there, it says each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, or revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Everything must be done so that the church may be built up. That's the important thing. In verse 29 it says, 2 or 3 prophets should speak. and the other should weigh carefully what is said. And if a revelation comes to someone who is sitting down, the first speaker should stop. For you can all prophesy in turn, so that everyone may be instructed and encouraged. The spirits of prophets are subject to the control of the prophets. In other words, they just don't overtake somebody and they can't stop from doing what they're doing. And it sounds like the church there, it was an absolute chaos. People talking and talking over one another and interrupting and all sorts of stuff going on. It says, verse 33 there, it says, "For God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as in all the congregations of the Lord's people." Now here's one where people get bent out of shape. What are we talking about here, by the way? We're talking about order in the church, in the worship service, correct? That's exactly what we're talking about. Verse 34, women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in church. Oh my goodness, talking about making people mad. Talking about making people mad. Verse 34, women should remain silent in the churches. We're not talking about in the home. We're not talking about in business. We're not talking about everywhere else. We're talking about during the worship service is what we're talking about here. And quite frankly, we've talked about this before. It had to be regulated in some aspect. And I love the example I have because it's so much, it's like Karen and I, okay? When you go on a trip with your spouse or someone else, and one of you is in the driver's seat and one of you is in the passenger seat, both of you don't have your hands on the wheel. Both of you ain't got a foot over there on the brake and the gas and everything like that, because if you do, you're going to wreck and crash. Now, the person driving, if Karen's like, I need to use the restroom, or I'm thirsty, can we? Or, are we sure we're going the right way? That doesn't happen nearly as much anymore. Thank you, GPS on our phones. I listen to her. Just because I've got my hands on the wheel doesn't mean I don't take input from my wife. Doesn't mean that I completely ignore her and she is a less of anything. But there's a proper way to drive a car. Just like there's a proper way for worship. And there had to be some guidelines put aside. Now, some people do not like that. This is not the only place he talked about it either. In 1 Timothy 2:12, it says, I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. Talking about, again, in the church. Doesn't say you can't have a woman boss at work or stuff like that. And then say, oh, you're saying I have to sit here completely silent. That's not what it's talking about. We know from other contexts in the Bible. 1 Timothy 2:8, they had prayer. Singing. How is a woman to sing Hebrews 2:12 if she can't say anything? Okay. So we know women can participate and so forth. But God did set aside some rules for His worship. It's His. We're here worshiping Him. He has a right to do that. And we should all be respectful about that. And just because some things are one way and not the other in God's worship doesn't mean God doesn't love and respect everybody there. Jesus died on the cross for every single one of us, men and women. Now, people want to twist this in the world today. We know that. People want to say things that's not true. We also hearken back just a little bit farther. What did we start out talking with today? Love. Love. Do we love? Do I love all of the women sitting out here if I'm not being respectful of them? No, I wouldn't be, right? I certainly hope none of y'all have ever thought I was not being respectful to you. But there are people in the world that want to twist all of this, sadly. And verse 33, for God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as in all the congregations of the Lord's people. Verse 40, but everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way. This is about order in the worship service of God. That's it. Don't let people try to turn this around, because they'll try. And unfortunately, we're out of time. Questions, comments, let us know. Just remember that we do love you. We try our best. We are human, but we try to love you in God's manner. Thank you, and hope you all have a nice day. Hopefully we'll see you in just a few minutes with our worship service.